The Story of Honey and Sunny by Evelyn Sharp. There once was a wonderful country in which everything was beautiful. All the trees, and the flowers, and the birds, and the animals were as beautiful as you could imagine. And so were the shops, and the houses, and the palaces. Of course, all the little girls and boys were beautiful too. But that is the same everywhere. Now, whether it was because of the beauty of his kingdom, or whether it was because of his royal birth, it is impossible to say, but the king was extremely anxious and unhappy. "I cannot bear anything noisy," he said. "Noise is so very alarming." So when the baby princess cried, he sent her away to another king's country to be brought up in a village nobody had ever heard of, so that her royal father would not be disturbed. And when he heard that the queen, his wife, had gone after her, he hardly raised his royal eyebrows. "She laughed too much anyway," he observed thoughtfully. The palace grew quieter day by day. The servants were forbidden to wear high heels because they made such a clatter on the marble floors. So everybody knew for the first time how short everybody else was. Every courtier whose boots creaked was instantly banished, and if someone coughed, he was beheaded. But the climate was so warm that this rarely happened. As time passed, everybody at court started to whisper, so that they wouldn't annoy the king, and eventually it became the fashion to talk as little as possible. The king was very pleased. "Anybody can talk," he said, "but it is a sign of great refinement to be silent." The king, of course, talked whenever he felt like it. The silence of the court soon spread over the country. Laws were made to forbid the people to keep chickens, or pigs, or cows, or anything that was noisy. And the children were ordered never to laugh, and never to cry, and never to quarrel, so that when the king rode around the country, everything was silent. But this wasn't all. The birds were so frightened by the stillness of everything that they stopped singing, and the leaves on the trees ceased to rustle when the wind blew. And even the frogs and the toads were startled at the hoarseness of their own voices and did not croak anymore, which was the most remarkable thing that ever happened. For it takes a very great deal to persuade a frog or a toad that his voice is not charming. The only sound that broke the silence was the occasional humming of bees, for the king still allowed the people to keep bees if they liked. "Bees are not noisy," he said. "They do not grunt or bark or croak. I can bear to listen to the humming of bees." But even the bees did not hum so much as bees normally do, because the sun soon realized that nobody laughed when he was shining his very best, so he went behind a cloud in a temper and stayed there for years and years and years. And bees can't live without sunshine. So the country grew less beautiful and more gloomy every year. But the village without a name in the other king's country, where the little princess was being brought up, was a very different kind of place. It was full of happy people who made as much noise as they pleased, and laughed when they were glad, and cried when they were sad, and never bothered about anything at all. And the chickens ran in and out of the cottages with the children, and the birds sang all the year round, and the sun had never been known to stop shining for a single minute. It was the jolliest country imaginable, for nobody interfered with anybody else, and the king never made any laws at all. And the only punishment that existed was for grumbling. Everybody was happy and jolly, and that was the great thing. Little Sunny the princess grew up without knowing that she was a princess, and nobody else knew that she was a princess either. and even the queen had almost forgotten that she was a king's wife. They lived in the tiniest cottage of all. They had called her Sunny because she could look straight at the sun without blinking, and it was such a good name for her that she was never called anything else. One fine day, Sunny sat up in the chocolate tree, listening to one of the stories that Honey the gardener's son was so fond of telling her. And Honey the gardener's son lay on the grass below and tried to catch the chocolate drops with which she was pelting him. "Why are all your stories so much alike, Honey?" asked Sunny the princess. "Why does the prince always go out into the world to find a princess? Why shouldn't the princess go and find the prince for a change? I wish I was a princess. I would start tomorrow. What fun!" She laughed her very happiest laugh and found an extra large chocolate drop and threw it into his mouth. Honey laughed as well as anyone could laugh with a chocolate drop in his mouth, and tried to think of an answer to her question. Honey was not his real name either, but it was the one they had given him because he knew the language of the bees, as, indeed, every true son of a gardener should. "Perhaps the stories are wrong," he said. "I only tell them to you as I have them from the bees. Or perhaps none of those particular princesses ever wanted to go out into the world to find anybody. Or perhaps," added Sunny, "they were just found before they had time to look for a prince themselves. Do you think that was it? Anyhow, I don't want to wait for a prince, for princes never come this way at all. So I'm going out into the world to seek my own fortune, and I shall start this very moment." She jumped down from the chocolate tree as she spoke and danced around Honey, clapping her hands with excitement. Honey was not surprised, for nobody was ever surprised at anything in that country, but he was just a little bit sad. "And I shall ask the first prince I meet if he will come back with me," continued Sunny, "just as the princes always ask the princesses in the stories. He won't know I'm not a princess, will he? And you won't tell him, Honey?" "No, I won't," Honey said, a bit sad. "I will come back someday, when I have found my prince, and then you shall be my gardener," she went on. "And you don't mind me going away without you, Honey?" "The princes in the stories always went alone," answered Honey. So that was how Sunny the princess went out into the world, without knowing that she was a princess. And of course everybody in the village missed her. But the queen, her mother, and Honey, the gardener's son, missed her most of all. Before she went, however, Honey taught her a song which she was to sing if she ever found herself in trouble, and this was the song. "Friends of honey, come to Sunny, whizzing, whirring, stillness stirring, sunlight blurring, friends of honey, fly to Sunny." And this she learned by heart before she started. She traveled for many days without having any adventures at all. It was such a delightful country that everybody was pleased to see her, and she never had any difficulty in getting enough to eat. She only had to smile, and that was all the payment that anybody wanted. But one day, as she was walking through a wood, a great change suddenly came over everything. Every sound was hushed, and the birds stopped singing, and the wind stopped playing with the leaves. There was not a rustle or a movement anywhere, and the sun had gone behind a cloud. In the whole of her short life, the little princess had never seen the sun go behind a cloud, and she felt like crying. The further she went, the darker and gloomier it grew, and at last she could not bear it another minute. So down she sat by the side of the road and wept. "You must stop that noise, or else you will be banished," said a voice. Sunny was so astonished that she stopped crying at once and looked up to see a little old man with a white beard staring at her. He was a very sad-looking little man, and his mouth was drawn down at the corners as though he had been on the point of crying all his life and had never quite broken down. "Why must I stop?" asked Sunny. "If you feel unhappy, you have to cry, right?" "No, no, no," said the sad little man in a tone of deep gloom. "I am always unhappy, but I never cry. The whole country is unhappy, but nobody is allowed to cry. If you cry, you must go away." "What a funny country," cried Sunny, and she at once began to laugh at the absurdity of it. "Don't do that," said the little man. "If you go on making any noises, you will get beheaded. Why can't you be quiet? You can do anything you like as long as you do it quietly." "I can't laugh," exclaimed Sunny. "What is the use of feeling happy if you can't laugh?" "It's of no use," said the sad little man. "Nobody is happy in this country. Nobody ever has been happy since the king was bewitched and the sun went away in a temper, and that was 16 years ago. Nobody ever will be happy again unless the spell is broken, and the spell cannot be broken until a princess of the royal blood comes this way without knowing that she is a princess." "How absurd," said Sunny. "As if a princess could be a princess without knowing she's a princess." "Why not?" asked the sad little man. He had lived alone in the dark, silent wood for such a long time that he began to find the conversation tiring. "Oh, because there are bands and flags and balls and banquets and cheers and princes and lots of fun wherever there's a princess," replied Sunny. The sad little man looked more sad than before. "Then the spell will never be broken," he said, "because all that noise would be stopped at once. If you are done talking, you better go, or else we will both be banished. And I advise you to take off those wooden shoes of yours, unless you want to be put into prison. But first of all, tell me if you can look straight at the sun without blinking." He always asked every girl he met that question, in case she should happen to be a princess, for he was really a very wise little man in spite of his sadness, and he knew that only eagles and princesses who did not know they were princesses could look straight at the sun without blinking. And he was so tired of feeling sad without being allowed to cry that he longed to have the spell removed from the country so that he wouldn't have to keep his tears back any longer. "Why, of course I can, if there is a sun," laughed Sunny. And to her astonishment, the sad little man dropped straight to the ground and put his fists in his eyes and began to cry at the very top of his voice, just like a baby. "What's wrong?" exclaimed Sunny. "Wrong!" shouted the little man, who was shaking with sobs from head to toe. "I've never been this happy in my life. I've been longing to cry for 16 years. As soon as the old man began to weep, the trees began to rustle, and the birds began to sing, and the frogs began to croak, and over it all came a faint glimmering of white light, as though the sun were beginning to stretch himself behind the cloud. "What is happening?" asked Sunny. "Go on to the palace and see," sobbed the sad little man, and Sunny ran as fast as she could in her wooden shoes, which made a lot of noise. For the first time in 16 years, there was this much noise in the town. People fell down in heaps, from sheer amazement at hearing such a noise after 16 years of silence. So nobody tried to stop her, and she ran faster and faster and faster, and the light grew brighter and brighter and brighter, until at last she stood in the courtyard of the king's palace. She ran up the steps and into the palace, and Sunny went clattering along the great hall until the sound of her coming reached the king's ears. Now the king sat on his throne with cotton wool stuffed in his ears, in case there would be, by accident, sound in the palace. But he still heard the clatter of Sunny's shoes coming closer and closer, and he began to feel terribly nervous.
"What is that noise? Take it away and behead it at once,"
he said to the Prime Minister in his most distinct whisper. But the noise outside was now so loud that the Prime Minister could not hear a word, and the next moment the door flung open, and Sunny the Princess ran into the room. And the king looked so funny as he tried to make the Prime Minister hear his whispers, and the Prime Minister looked so funny as he tried to hear the king's whispers that Sunny had to laugh. And when she begun, she found she couldn't stop. So she laughed and laughed and laughed. And when the poor, nervous old king turned again to the Prime Minister to tell him to behead the girl at once, he found that the Prime Minister was laughing too. And immediately all the courtiers in the courtyard, and the cooks in the kitchen, and the townspeople in the streets, and the children in the nurseries were all laughing as hard as they could. And when the sun heard all this laughter, he came out from behind the cloud and shone his very best once more. So there was the sunshine again, and there was everybody laughing, except the king. Now, when the king found that no one was paying any attention to his royal whispers, he began to grow angry, and without thinking any more about it, he shouted at the very top of his royal voice. And this was so remarkable, after 16 years of whispering, that the laughter was instantly hushed. And even Sunny the Princess became silent, because she wanted to know what was going to happen next. "Who are you?" demanded the king, pointing at her with his scepter. "I'm Sunny, of course," she said, stepping up to the throne in quite a friendly manner. "She's the little princess, your daughter," said a voice from the doorway, and there stood the queen. When the king saw her, he forgot that she used to laugh too much, and he came down from his throne in a hurry and he kissed her. So that was how Sunny found out she was a princess. And there were bands and flags and balls and banquets and cheers and princes and lots of fun. For that evening the king gave a magnificent ball to celebrate the return of his daughter Sunny, and all the princes in the kingdom were invited to it. "Now," said the queen, as she carefully put on Sunny's beautiful new crown, "you will be able to find your prince, as you said you would." But Sunny shook her head and wondered why she felt so sad when everything seemed to be going so well. She went to the open window and looked out into the garden. As she did, she heard a faint buzzing and humming, and 3 beautiful bees flew down and settled on her arm. And Sunny gave a cry of joy and knew all at once why she had been feeling so lonely. And she began to sing the song Honey the gardener's son had taught her. Everybody wondered why the princess was so disdainful to all the princes who danced with her that night. But nobody wondered anymore when Honey the gardener's son arrived. And he came, all in his gardener's clothes, and he walked straight into the palace, just as Sunny had done, and she met him in the great hall. And they both shouted with happiness and ran straight into each other's arms, and they kissed and kissed and kissed. They sat down on the steps of the king's throne, just because it happened to be there, and Sunny told him everything that had happened to her. "It is very boring being a princess," said Sunny. And I don't like palaces. They are such stuffy places. The people who live in them are rather stuffy too. And there isn't a chocolate tree in the whole of the garden. Have you ever seen such a stupid garden? Oh, I am so glad you're here, honey. Have you found your prince? Was all that Honey said. Princes are boring too, said Sunny. It is much nicer in the village, under the chocolate tree. Of course it is, said Honey. Let's go back. In the end, the queen stayed with the king, and Honey and Sunny were married that very same day and went back to live in the village without a name. And there they built a very small house in a very big garden, and they planted it with rows of chocolate trees, and the fairies came and filled it with flowers from fairyland that had no names at all, but were the most beautiful flowers that anyone has ever seen, for they never faded or died, but just changed into something else when they were tired of being the same flower. So no wonder that Honey and Sunny were happy forever
How old Witch Nada
and
stole
ever.
the moon and the sun. Once upon a time, thousands and thousands of years ago, I expect, for no one ever hears of Witch Nada in these days, an old witch named Nada used to jump on her broomstick with another broom in her hand. She used to fly about the sky, brushing away the cobwebs, as she called them. What she really did was to brush away the little rain clouds that the stars used for veils when they were tired of shining. You let our veils stay over our faces, said the little stars, quite angry with old Witch Nada. We want them. You wicked old witch, go away, go away. But Witch Nada would only laugh a cackling laugh and go on with her broom, sweeping away the cobwebs. Silly little stars, said old Witch Nada. They would have the sky in a most untidy state if it weren't for me. I have to sweep every night. If I didn't, the sky would be filled with cobwebs. Veils indeed. Those silly little things do not know the difference between a veil and a cobweb. One night, the stars were all wearing their veils when along came old Witch Nada with her broom and whisked them off. And the little stars were so angry they forgot their nice manners. And many of them rushed at old Witch Nada, darting little sharp points right into her face and making her wink and blink so that she couldn't see where she was going. And she bumped right into the moon, who was just coming out from behind a cloud to see what was going on. Look out where you are going, old witch, he called. Old Nada dropped her broom and made a grab for the moon, and she caught him too, right by the nose. Here, 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 let go of my nose, he cried. But old Witch Nada did not let go. She hung on and carried him off to her house on the top of a high mountain. I'll give those silly little stars something to cry about now, said old Nada, as she opened a dark closet and threw in the moon. They won't have any moonlight for a while, and if I can get the sun, I can have all the things my own way in the sky and make those stars sorry they were rude to me tonight. The next day, when the sun was shining and not thinking a thing about any harm coming to him, old Nada put on her smoked glasses and her high-topped cap and a long black cape. Then she jumped on her broomstick and flew straight for the sun. Of course, the stars were asleep and could not warn the sun, and he thought it was a black cloud he saw sailing toward him. Ha, now I can take a little nap, he said. Here comes a black cloud, which I can hide behind for a while. I do get so sleepy shining all day. And then the sun gave a yawn just to get ready for his nap. But something happened. He didn't just know what, but before he could stop to yawn, he felt a jerk. And then he was covered with something black and whizzed along at a terrible rate of speed. He didn't know where. There, "I guess I can run things to suit myself now," said old witch Neda, as she took from under her cape the sun, winking and blinking and wondering whatever had happened to him. Into the dark closet with the moon she threw the sun and closed the door. Of course, the stars awoke as soon as it was dark, and it became dark right away when old Neda stole the sun. So the little stars shone and winked all night and all day, because the sun did not get up, and they did not know when the night was over. The next night they twinkled, and the next day, but then they began to get so sleepy they could not keep their bright eyes open, and one by one they began to nod. "I wonder what can be the matter with us," said one star, trying to keep awake. "This is the longest night I've ever seen." "I wonder where the moon is," said another. "If we could see him, we might find out why the sun is so lately this morning." Old Witch Neda was flying about, hidden beneath her black cape, and she laughed to herself as she heard what the stars were saying. "I can tell you where the sun is and the moon too," she said, throwing off her cape and showing herself to the stars. "I have them both locked up in a closet in my room." And off she flew on her broomstick, leaving the poor little stars quite speechless with amazement. "Something must be done, and done at once," said one star. "If we let that old witch have the sun and moon, who knows what will become of us?" "But what can we do?" asked another star. "Here we are up in the sky, and old Neda's house is on the top of a mountain. Besides that, she will keep a close watch over them, you may be sure. What can we do, and what will become of us?" "One of us must go down there and let them out," said the first star. "Now, which one of us will go? That's the first thing to settle." No one answered for a minute, and then a very little star said timidly, "I'm willing to go, but I'm so small, I do not suppose I could do any good." "You are the very one to go, just because you are so small," said the first star. "And now I will tell you how it can be done. Old Witch Neda will be up here tonight, you may be sure, because she is happy now that she has the sun and the moon, and wants to see how unhappy we are. When she comes tonight, we must make a great fuss and cry because we are so upset, not knowing when it is day or night, and beg her to help us. She will fly around close to us, and when she is very near, little star, we must wail and cry and attract her attention. And then little star must jump on the broomstick right behind old Witch Neda." "Oh," said all the stars, "oh," for they were afraid of old Neda. But the little star did not cry out. She just winked and blinked and listened to what the first star said. "As I said," continued the first star, "little star must jump on the broomstick right behind old Witch Neda, and then close her eyes until old Neda comes to her house on top of the mountain. Of course, she can only take just one look then, just to see where the old witch goes. And little star must stay very still until old Neda goes to bed, for she usually sleeps in the daytime. When all is still and you are sure old Witch Neda sleeps, then you must go about very carefully and quietly until you find the closet where the sun and the moon are kept prisoners, and unlock the door." "But what good will that do?" asked one star. "They will be out of the closet. But how will they ever get back to their places in the sky? The old witch will never bring them, of course." "Wait, my dear sister, and I will tell you even how that can be managed," said the first star. "After you have released the sun and the moon, little star, you must hurry to the place where the old witch keeps her magic broomstick and jump on it. Smooth it 3 times one way and then 3 times in the opposite direction, and it will obey you. You must be very careful, however, to smooth it but one way until you have the sun and moon safely on it with you. But hush, hush, here comes old Witch Neda." Old Witch Nada cackled and chuckled when she heard the wailing and crying the stars were making over the loss of the sun and the moon. "Oh, give them back to us! Give them back to us!" they cried. "We will never be rude to you again, even when you pull up our veils." "Haha," said the old witch, laughing loudly. "I guess you won't be rude to me, my silly little stars, for I intend to keep the old moon and sun locked in my closet and make you shine all the time until you are so sleepy you fall out of the sky. Ha ha ha!" "Oh, oh," cried the stars all together, and old Nada flew close to them to better see how they suffered. And then Little Star did as the first star had told her to do, and the next instant she was flying along with Old Witch Nada toward her house on the top of the mountain. Little Star looked just once and saw old Nada go into the house. Then she closed her eyes and waited until she was sure the witch was asleep. Very, very carefully, she opened the door and slipped in. Then she looked around, and from under the door, she saw a very bright light and knew that behind that door were the sun and the moon. The key was in the door, and it took only a second to turn it. "Hush," said the little star. "I've come to release you. Do not make a sound. Follow me." Little Star took from a chair Old Witch Nada's big black cape and threw it over the sun and the moon so their bright light might not awaken the old witch. And in another minute, they were all sitting on the broomstick, while Little Star moved it 3 times one way and 3 times the other, and then said, "Off to the sky, take us home, good broomstick." Away they flew, and in a short time the sun was shining in the sky, just as if nothing had happened to him, and the stars went to sleep and slept soundly. They were so tired. Little Star that night took her place in the sky very quietly, but the other stars wanted to know all about her adventure. "Oh, I just did as the first star told me," modestly replied the little star, "and brought back the sun and the moon, that was all." "You were a brave little star," said the first star, "and as a reward, the broomstick of the old witch has been made into stars, which is to be made into a big cross, and this cross forever you shall shine, and you will take on more brightness than any of us, brave, brave little star." Of course, the old witch, having lost her broomstick, could not bother the stars anymore, so they shone and twinkled happily on, always feeling grateful to Little Star for helping them out of their great trouble.
The kite that went to the moon. Tom had made the biggest kite in the village, and Anna had painted a big round moon on it and several stars as well. Tom felt very proud of himself when he ran to the village square to fly it. "Stand back," he said, as the girls and boys came crowding round him. "Now you will see my kite fly to the moon." Tom was making a big fuss about his kite. It is not every day that one has a chance of flying the biggest kite in the village, especially when you are only 7 years old. He was very sad, however, when he saw that his kite had no intention of flying to the moon. Every time he threw it into the air, back it fell again on the grass. And although he tried again and again, anyone could see that something was wrong with the biggest kite in the village. Tom turned red and blinked his eyes and reminded himself that he was only 7 years old. It was hard to swallow that he spent so much time on making the kite and it wouldn't even fly. But when all the boys and girls burst out laughing and pointed their fingers at him and began to tease, it was impossible to keep back his tears any longer. The children, however, only laughed more. When the little maker of the kite suddenly flung himself down on the ground and began to cry, he picked up his kite and marched off to school to find Anna. "My kite wouldn't fly," he remarked, and tried to look as though he did not care a bit. "What?" cried Anna. "Your kite didn't fly?" Tom clambered on the window ledge and sat there with his legs swinging. The The string got mixed up, he explained. I think that's why it didn't fly. I don't, said Anna decidedly. It was because the tail was too short. I told you so all the time. Let's go, said Tom. Where are we going? Asked Anna when she joined him. We are going out into the world to discover the reason why my kite won't fly, answered Tom. And between them, they picked up the biggest kite in the village and carried it out into the world. How are we going to discover why your kite won't fly? Asked Anna when they had walked for a little while. We will ask everybody we meet, said Tom. Surely there is somebody in the world who can tell us. And we will not rest until we find him. How long do you think we shall have to go on walking before we find the right person? Perhaps for years and years, answered Tom cheerfully. But if we are quick, we may meet him sooner than that. It began to grow dark now, and they didn't see anyone. The world is not so full of people as I expected to find it, said Tom in a disappointed tone. I do hope we shall meet someone who will know why my kite won't fly. Then he heard Anna sobbing. I'm so hungry, she said. Can't we go home, Tom, and put off seeing the world until tomorrow? I'm afraid I don't know the way home, he said. But if you will wait here, I will go and get you something to eat. He was not sure where he was going to find it, but he hurried along the road as fast as he could. On the road, he met a little old man who was carrying a large sack on his shoulder. Well, hello, my little fellow, he said in a friendly tone. What do you want out of my bag? It depends what you have in your bag, answered Tom. I have everything in the world in my bag, replied the little old man. For everything is there that everybody wants. I've laughter and tears and happiness and sadness. I can give you riches or poverty, sense or nonsense. Here's a way to discover the things that you don't know, and a way to forget the things that you do know. We have a toy that changes whenever you wish, or a book that tells you stories whenever you listen to it. Choose whatever you like, and it shall be yours. But remember, I can only give you one thing out of my bag, so think well before you make up your mind. Do you have something to eat in your bag? He asked. The little old man smiled and pulled out a small cake. The old man disappeared, sack and all. That moment he had given Tom the cake. So back trotted Tom to the place where he had left Anna. What a beautiful cake, she cried. It tastes like strawberry jam and toffee and ice and all the things I like best. And see, as fast as I eat it, it grows back. Take a bite. It tastes like currant buns and ginger beer and all the things I like best. It is certain that we will never starve as long as we have a fairy cake like this. Then he told her how he got it. Perhaps, remarked Anna, the little old man could have told you why your kite didn't fly. Perhaps he could have, said Tom, but I didn't think to ask him. We'll ask the next person instead. When they looked round for the kite, it was nowhere to be seen. The moon came out from behind a cloud and helped them as much as it could. But although they searched for a long time, they couldn't find it. Perhaps I went to sleep while you were away and somebody took it. But I think I was awake. You were, it's not your fault, cried a voice from the hedge. Of course, no one but an elf would have appeared like that, just in time to say the right thing. So the children were not at all surprised when an elf came tumbling out of the hedge. Do you know where the kite has gone? Asked both the children. Look up and see, answered the elf, pointing to the sky. The sky was covered with stars, hundreds and thousands of them, all twinkling round the moon, just as Anna had painted them on the kite. One of them was different from all the others. It had a long, bright tail that glittered like a Christmas tree ornament, and was scurrying across the sky at such a pace that the rest of the stars had to get out of its way as best they could. Most of the people who looked out of their windows that night thought they saw a comet, but Tom and Anna knew better. They cried, clapping their hands with excitement. There is our kite, and it's flying to the moon after all." "There's no doubt about that," said the elf. "But why didn't it fly to the moon this afternoon when all the other boys were looking?" asked Tom. "Because there was no moon to fly to, of course," answered the elf. "Then, if I had painted the sun on it instead of the moon, would it have flown to the sun this afternoon?" exclaimed Anna. "Yes, it would have," said the elf. "Why did you paint the moon?" "Well, you see, the moon is so nice and easy," explained Anna. "All you have to do is draw a circle around the biggest plate you can find. And then you take away the plate and you paint in the eyes and the nose and the mouth. And there you are." "Do you want to go to the moon?" asked the elf. Anna looked round, and there was Tom still gazing up at the star with the long tail that was causing so much commotion among the sky. Just then it reached the moon and went straight into it with a big splash. "Yes, very much," Tom told the elf. "But it's not the moon we want, it's the kite. And the kite has gone to the moon, and I wish it had waited to take me with it. I shall have the greatest pleasure in taking you there. I will call a comet at once." He put his fingers to his mouth and blew a whistle that was long enough to reach the sky. Down swooped a great shining comet. The children climbed on its broad glittering tail and held tightly to each other. The elf took the steering wheel, and then up they flew at a terrific pace, right through the wonderful blue darkness that stretched all around them. It grew lighter and lighter as they came nearer to the moon. And there were less stars, for stars prefer to shine in a place where they can be seen. The elf landed a comet on the moon. The kids were amazed. The moon was beautiful. Tom was looking everywhere for his kite. Then something almost crashed into them. "Why don't you look where you are going?" asked the kite. And the comet made a snarky comment back. A row was about to happen when somebody said, "Stop this bickering right now." "Uh-oh," muttered the elf. "I was expecting that. Goodbye, children, I'm off." And pointing his hands downward, he took a dive from the head of the comet and disappeared into the direction of the stars. Then Tom and Anna saw a tall figure, as white and delicate and shimmering as the light that surrounded it. Can it be the man on the moon?" whispered Anna. Then the figure came closer, and they saw that it was a wonderful, mysterious-looking white witch woman. "I am the Lady of the Moon," she said, in the same clear, cold voice. "Snow and stillness and space are wherever I go. When I smile, I make the whole world beautiful. But my smile takes the color away from the flowers, and the ripple away from the water, and the warmth away from the sunshine." She looked around, and her eye lighted on Tom's kite. "What is that creature doing in my country?" she demanded. "It is my kite. I made it all by myself. And Anna painted the moon and the stars on it." "I'm afraid," said Anna, "that the moon is not very much like the moon. But it was the best I could do with 3 paints. The stars are all right," she added anxiously. The Lady of the Moon smiled. "Stars indeed," she observed. "But what does it matter how the stars are painted? The moon is far more important. And you have made a regular muddle of that. Who brought you here?" "The elf brought us," explained Tom. "He was here a minute ago, but he just left." "Please, can I take my kite back with me?" he asked boldly. "I want to show the other boys and girls that it did fly to the moon after all." "Go, go! Dawn is coming, and you will be swallowed up in the setting of the moon," she screamed at them. "Go, go, go!" "Jump, Anna, jump!" he shouted. Tom and Anna were sitting on the top of the biggest kite in the village. "Now," said Tom to his kite, "you take us home, straight away." The sun was shining brightly, and the birds were singing, and the children were laughing on their way to school, when Tom and Anna at last reached home on the biggest kite in the village. "Oh!" cried all the boys and girls, rushing up to them in great excitement. "Tom and Anna have been sailing on the biggest kite in the village. Where have you been, Tom?" Didn't I tell you my kite was going to the moon? Then Tom went home to breakfast, but the kite sailed back to the sky. The Velveteen Rabbit. There was once a velveteen rabbit, and in the beginning he was gorgeous. He was fat and bunchy, as a rabbit should be. His coat was spotted brown and white. He had real thread whiskers, and his ears were lined with pink sateen. On Christmas morning, he was wedged in the top of the boy's stocking, with a sprig of holly between his paws. There were other things in the stocking, nuts and oranges, and a toy engine, and chocolate almonds, and a clockwork mouse. But the rabbit was the best of all. For at least 2 hours, the boy loved him, and then aunts and uncles came to dinner, and there was a great rustling of tissue paper and unwrapping of parcels, and in the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was forgotten. For a long time, he lived in the toy cupboard, or on the nursery floor, and no one thought very much about him. He was naturally shy, and being only made of velveteen, some of the more expensive toys snubbed him. The mechanical toys were superior and looked down upon everyone else. They were full of modern ideas and pretended they were real. The model boat, who had lived through 2 seasons and lost most of his paint, caught the tone from them and never missed an opportunity of referring to his rigging in technical terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed like himself. Even Timothy, the wooden lion, put on airs and pretended he was connected with the government. Between them all, the poor little rabbit was made to feel very insignificant and common, and the only person who was kind to him at all was the horse. The horse had lived in the nursery longer than any of the others. He was so old that his brown coat was bald in patches and showed the seams underneath, and most of the hairs in his tail had been plucked out. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive boasting, but soon they would break their mainsprings and pass away. And he knew that they were only toys and would never turn into anything else. For nursery magic is very strange and wonderful, and only those playthings that are old and wise and experienced like the horse understand all about it. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the horse. "It's a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked, "or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been lopped off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." "I suppose you are real?" said the rabbit. And then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the horse might be sensitive. But the horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts forever." The rabbit sighed. He thought it would be a long time before this magic called real happened to him. He longed to become real, to know what it felt like. And yet the idea of growing shabby and losing his eyes and whiskers was rather sad. He wished that he could become it without these uncomfortable things happening to him. There was a person called Nana who ruled the nursery. Sometimes she took no notice of the playthings lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatever, she went swooping about like a great wind and hustled them away in the cupboards. She called this tidying up, and all the playthings hated it, especially the tin ones. The rabbit didn't mind it so much, for wherever he was thrown, he came down soft. One evening, when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the dog that always slept with him. Nana was in a hurry, and it was too much trouble to hunt for dogs at bedtime. So she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard door stood open, she made a swoop. "Here," she said, "take your old bunny, he'll sleep with you." And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first, he found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could hardly breathe. And he missed, too, those long moonlight hours in the nursery, when all the house was silent, and his talks with the horse. But very soon he grew to like it, for the boy used to talk to him and made him nice tunnels under the bedclothes that he said were like the burrows where real rabbits lived. And they did fun games together in whispers when Nana had gone away and left the nightlight on. And when the boy fell asleep, the rabbit would snuggle down close under his little warm chin and dream, with the boy's hands clapped close round him all night. And so time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy, so happy that he never noticed how his beautiful velveteen fur was getting shabbier and shabbier, and his tail become unsewn, and all the pink rubbed off his nose where the boy had kissed him. Spring came, and they had long days in the garden, for wherever the boy went, the rabbit went too. He had rides in the wheelbarrow, and picnics on the grass, and lovely fairy huts were built for him under the raspberry canes behind the flower border. And once, when the boy was called away suddenly to go drink tea, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dusk. And Nana had to come and look for him, because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. He was wet from the dew, and quite earthy from diving into the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed. And Nana grumbled as she rubbed him off with the corner of her apron. "What a fuss for an old stinky rabbit toy," she said. The boy sat up in bed and stretched out his hands. "Give me my bunny," he said. "Don't say that. He isn't a toy. He's real." When the little rabbit heard that, he was happy, for he knew that what the horse had said was true. The nursery magic had happened to him, and he was a toy no longer. He was real. The boy himself had said it. That night, he was almost too happy to sleep, and so much love stirred in his little heart that it almost burst. And in his button eyes, that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of wisdom and beauty. That was a wonderful summer. Near the house where they lived, there was a wood, and in the long June evenings, the boy liked to go there to play. He took the Velveteen Rabbit with him, and before he wandered off to pick flowers or play at brigands among the trees, he always made the rabbit a little nest somewhere, where he would be quite cozy. For he was a kind-hearted little boy, and he liked Bunny to be comfortable. One evening, while the rabbit was lying there alone, watching the ants between his velvet paws in the grass, he saw two strange beings creep out of the tall grass near him. They were rabbits like himself, but quite furry and brand new. They must have been very well made, for their seams didn't show at all, and they changed shape when they moved. One minute they were long and thin, and the next minute fat and bunchy, instead of always staying the same like he did. Their feet patted softly on the ground, and they crept quite close to him, twitching their noses, while the rabbit stared hard to see which side the clockwork stuck out, for he knew that people who jump generally have something to wind them up, but he couldn't see it. They were evidently a new kind of rabbit altogether. They stared at him, and the little rabbit stared back, and all the time their noses twitched. "Why don't you get up and play with us?" one of them asked. "I don't feel like it," said the rabbit, for he didn't want to explain that he had no clockwork. Said the furry rabbit. "It's as easy as anything." And he gave a big hop sideways and stood on his hind legs. "I don't believe you can," he said. "I can," said the little rabbit. "I can jump higher than anything." He meant when the boy threw him, but of course he didn't want to say so. "Can you hop on your hind legs?" asked the furry rabbit. That was a dreadful question, for the velveteen rabbit had no hind legs at all. The back of him was made all in one piece, like a pincushion. He sat still in the bracken and hoped that the other rabbits wouldn't notice. "I don't want to," he said again. But the wild rabbits have very sharp eyes, and this one stretched out his neck and looked. "He hasn't got any hind legs," he called out. "A rabbit without any hind legs," and he began to laugh. "I have," cried the little rabbit. "I have got hind legs. I am sitting on them." "Then stretch them out and show me, like this," said the wild rabbit. And he began to whirl round and dance, till the little rabbit got quite dizzy. "I don't like dancing," he said. "I'd rather sit still." But all the while he was longing to dance, for a funny new feeling ran through him, and he felt he would give anything in the world to be able to jump about like these rabbits did. The strange rabbit stopped dancing and came quite close. He came so close this time that his long whiskers brushed the velveteen rabbit's ear, and then he wrinkled his nose suddenly and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "He doesn't smell right," he exclaimed. "He isn't a rabbit at all. He isn't real." "I am real," said the little rabbit. "I am real. The boy said so." And he nearly began to cry. Just then there was a sound of footsteps, and the boy ran past near them. And with a stomp of feet and a flash of white tails, the two strange rabbits disappeared. "Come back and play with me," called the little rabbit. "Oh, come back. I know I'm real." But there was no answer. The velveteen rabbit was all alone. Why did they run away like that? Why couldn't they stop and talk to me? For a long time he lay very still, hoping that they would come back. But they never returned, and the sun sank lower, and the boy came and carried him home. Weeks passed, and the little rabbit grew very old and shabby, but the boy loved him just as much. He loved him so hard that he loved all his whiskers off. And the pink lining to his ears turned gray, and his brown spots faded. He even began to lose his shape, and he didn't really look like a rabbit anymore, except to the boy. To him he was always beautiful, and that was all the little rabbit cared about. He didn't mind how he looked to other people, because the nursery magic had made him real. And when you are real, shabbiness doesn't matter. And then, one day, the boy was ill. His face grew very flushed, and he talked in his sleep, and his little body was so hot that it burned the rabbit when he held him close. Strange people came and went into the nursery, and through it all the little velveteen rabbit lay there, hidden from sight under the bedclothes, and he never stirred, for he was afraid that if they found him, they would take him away, and he knew that the boy needed him. It was a long, weary time, for the boy was too ill to play, and the little rabbit found it rather dull, with nothing to do all day. But but he snuggled down patiently and looked forward to the time when the boy would be better again. All sorts of delightful things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up close to the pillow and whispered them in his ear. And then the fever turned, and the boy got better. He was able to sit up in bed and look at picture books, while the little rabbit cuddled close at his side. And one day, they let him get up and get dressed. It was a bright sunny morning, and the window stood wide open. They had carried the boy out onto the balcony, and the little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, thinking. The boy was going to the seaside tomorrow. Everything was arranged, and now it only remained to carry out the doctor's orders. They talked about it all, while the little rabbit lay under the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, and listened. The room was to be disinfected, and all the books and toys that the boy had played with in his bed must be burned. Hooray, thought the little rabbit. Tomorrow we will go to the seaside. For the boy had often talked of the seaside, and he wanted very much to see it. The waves and the tiny crabs and the sand castles. Just then Nana caught sight of him. "How about this old bunny?" she asked. "Dad," said the doctor, "it's full of fever germs. Burn it at once. Get him a new one. He mustn't have that one anymore." And so the little rabbit was put into a sack with the old picture books and a lot of rubbish, and carried out to the end of the garden. There was a good place to make a bonfire, only